Okay, so who am I? I'm currently working with Pearson. They're a very large publisher, 40,000 plus employees, 2,000-ish apps. Prior to that, I worked at Rackspace, the cloud company. I've done a bunch of AppSec consulting. I've been a pen tester. My first job actually was development, oddly enough, in a little town called College Station, Texas, which wouldn't exist except for there's a university there. And I was writing apps that were used primarily in Europe. So when I messed up my app, I had a really mad Belgian guy calling me at like 2 in the morning to come up and fix it. So that's my background. Prior to my other, in addition to my professional background, there we go, I've been running a project called, what was originally called the OWASP Live CD, is now called OWASP WTE. It is a whole bunch of pre-configured AppSec tools all bundled together in a VM. I was on the board of the directors for OWASP. I've done a bunch of talking. I have a bachelor's in economics and a graduate degree in, a master's degree in MIS, Management Information Systems. That's me. So what's the problem? The cycle time for software is getting ridiculously short. And delivery, if you're not there already, management wants continuous delivery. They want this stuff out yesterday, and they want it out fast. So if you ever had a scanning window, you don't anymore. Like that whole idea of a 1-week scanning window was kind of a joke. Gosh, years ago, it was about 2002. I was working at TEA, and I looked at a Gantt chart on one of the project manager's desk, and you're watching it go down. Security testing, 0 days, right? So it was planned failure. And then if you do try to fight and slow down the process, you're honestly going to lose anyway because there's too much of a first mover advantage and the business will stomp on you. So in this reality, like, how do you make AppSec work, right? And just a few more problems, right? Even if you are a traditional waterfall shop, you probably didn't get enough time anyway. And now if you're facing DevOps, Agile, continuous delivery, continuous integration, you're squeezed even harder. At Rackspace, the most aggressive group that we had was delivering code to production on average, 75 times a week, right? So where is my testing window in that? It doesn't exist, right? And then at Rackspace, this was particularly a problem. We had tons and tons of Python because of OpenStack. And that is an interpreted language that has no real good static analysis tools for it. So now you have a language that is being written very quickly, and you can't automatically analyze. And then we also had tons of REST APIs, which also there aren't very many good automated tools to do that testing. So it feels like we're all doomed, right? We should just drink poison and die. Well, maybe not. But certainly if you thought there was time for manual testing, there isn't. So what do? Automate all the things. And I'm going to talk to you through what we did for automation and how that worked for us. And if you didn't notice back a few slides, I like Bruce Lee. I think Bruce Lee is pretty awesome. Myself and my 2 kids, we take martial arts. Bruce Lee is the man. And one thing the man said was, don't get set into one form. Adapt it, build your own, let it grow, be like water, right? You pour water into a cup, it becomes a cup, right? So I think AppSec professionals today have to understand where the devs are going and go there. Because if you can try to fight them, but honestly, the business exists to make, let me put it this way, if you're writing software, it's because it doesn't exist and you can't go buy it off the shelf. Therefore, the business wants it. You need to get up to speed with those developers. And quite honestly, I think we can be that fast. So it is definitely a time to mourn. Traditional AppSec, if it was ever alive, is dead. And I'm going to give you some suggestions on how to sort of do the next evolution, I believe, of AppSec. So traditionally, Waterfall was the way to go, right? You'd have very early prescriptive requirements that said the end system will look like this. You'll have very long deployment cycles, and it honestly kind of made sense back in the day when we shipped CDs around. If you're going to burn your code onto a fixed medium and ship it to somebody via the mail, maybe Waterfall is right, but that's rarely the case anymore. At least in my world, it's almost all software as a service. We want it on the web. We don't want to actually ship anybody media. There's no real reason to have this prescriptive approach. There was very little, if any, kind of feedback loops to understand what was going on. And traditionally, right, the devs got done. They said, hey, look, it works on my laptop. They chuck it to ops, and ops would just have to figure it out, right? So here's the waterfall, right? This is how it worked, or should have worked, right? You go down the steps, everything's fine. My problem is, I think today with Waterfall, particularly in web and software as a service, you fall. There's no water. You just fall. So what does DevOps have to say about this? DevOps is really, Well, let me back up. Why did DevOps come to be? So web and cloud companies wanted to get software out really, really fast. And waiting for large features to be done over long periods of time just didn't work. The other thing they really, really wanted was high availability. Because if your site goes down, you go to the next site, you go to the competitor site, and you're done with them. There was one night that I was writing some code, and for whatever reason, Stack Exchange went down, and I thought, how many people have stopped coding tonight, right? No Stack Exchange, I can't code. So the other problem, too, is that with software, or not the problem, but the other issue is with software as a service, there's nothing to ship, right? If you're coming to my software as a service, I can do upgrades, changes, feature adds, what have you, all the time. And you as a user just get more out of my site. What makes DevOps different than traditional software? It's really a cultural thing. It's having teams work together for a common goal and making them all accountable for the final success. It is not cool things like Docker or CI/CD or Jenkins or whatever the nifty little whiz-bangy thing is. It's really less about technology and more about an approach to problem solving. And the big thing is that devs and sysadmins have to basically share responsibility. The one really aggressive group that was doing those 75 deploys a week at Rack, they actually had 5 developers on their team. One of them wore the sysadmin hat each week, and they just rotated. So you want to talk about like not wanting to chuck code over the wall? Because the guy who was the developer is going to be the sysadmin next week. And if you chuck unrunnable code over the wall, guess what's going to happen to you, right? Now you have this team atmosphere and you actually want to work together. And I think that's one of the crucial things about DevOps that really works. And the goal, better uptime and a lower operational cost, no one's going to argue with that. That's the DevOps answer. So notice that the stiffest tree is easily cracked, while bamboo and willow survives the bending with the wind. So I really think as AppSec professionals, we have to change our mindset and get into a different mode of thinking to get the job done, to be faster and keep up with the pace of change of software. Because if we try to do the old way, we couldn't keep up anyway, we're really, really doomed, because it's just getting faster. So I read this book called The Phoenix Project. It is a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, wait till I'm done talking and then go order it from Amazon. Or maybe wait a little bit longer, but it's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it, you read it, and if you've ever done IT, you will have lived a lot of the stories in the book. But the one thing that the Phoenix Project does is it talks about the 3 ways of DevOps, and it divides it into sort of 3 levels of maturity as you're sort of coming to Zen with DevOps. So the first of the 3 ways is workflow. So for workflow, you need to look at your purpose and the processes with agents. So this is figuring out what you do for your business that provides value and making sure it's correct as possible from front to end. Once you get that process well understood and documented, then you speed it up. So for me, when I started at Pearson, actually oddly enough, I'll show you a slide in a little bit about what we ended up with. On day 4, I sat down and said, what do we need to do? And I drew it out on a piece of paper. And I figured out these are the steps that are important for our AppSec program. And we actually got those things in place before we even worried about trying to get up to speed. That's really a crucial point. And there's another thing in DevOps you may hear called the value stream, and that is the process that you do that provides value to the business. So in an AppSec sense, the value stream is you finding and getting fixed, and hopefully even better, preventing vulnerabilities in the software that your company is producing. And then flow, or the flow rate, is how quickly something moves from the beginning to the end of your process. Okay, those are all sort of key and important terms in DevOps. So for example, a workflow here, right, you write some code, you check it into a repository, some unit tests runs, you package it up, you deploy it maybe to test, you do some integration testing, everything works out, you push that code to production, right? That's a simple workflow. But what does a workflow look like when you're doing this for AppSec, right? It's not this. This is not what we do in AppSec. What does it look like? I think it looks like an AppSec pipeline. And this is what we've done at Pearson. Oh, wow, this doesn't actually project all that great. Well, the guy who's been cut off over there is just somebody requesting services of the AppSec team, a project manager, a product owner, what have you. They come into this thing called Bag of Holding. It's an internal application we wrote in Django. It will be open source probably in the next 2 weeks. We finally got legal clearance, hallelujah. And that keeps an inventory of all of our apps and a ton of metadata around them, and then keeps track of our engagements. In other words, what activities we're doing with what app. So it's sort of an inventory and tracking system. We tie that to a security or a service or service orchestration layer, which in our case is StackStorm. It's part of the wow, I cannot speak. I can't keep up with you, Jim. You're too fast for me. I do need a glass of water. But it's part of the OpenStack bunch of services.
You can give out all those things right there, too.
Okay, I'll give out all those things there, too. After my talk, though. Okay, much better. In that orchestration layer, we're wiring together tools and also passing out engagements. At Pearson, we have there's 12 of us in total of varying skill levels. And so that allows us to sort of feed the right work to the right people. We're also doing some automation of the tooling. So these are I just put some tools up there, it really doesn't matter. Veracode, check marks, whatever. We're wiring all those up together and adding automation. When all those tools are done, that input gets fed into ThreadFix. ThreadFix takes those, all of the findings we have, dedupes and combines them and gives us one sort of universal look at them. They go out into bug trackers. We do some false positive analysis. We also do reporting and metrics, all off of ThreadFix, and we're done. So let's talk about what AppSec pipelines. It really annoys me that my slides are cut off. That's really horrible. So what are the key features? Probably the single most important thing, we designed to never be done with this pipeline. It is designed to be iteratively evolved over time, quite on purpose, because it's hard to find slots of time to get these things built. So we made it so that it's very easy to add, like a bunch of Lego blocks. We just keep adding blocks. And it provides a reusable path that all of our activities flow in. So it allows us to have well-known states as things progress through the system. And it's a consistent process so that not only people on our AppSec team, but also the business owners that we interact with kind of know where they are in this process. Because I can give them a picture and say, you're right here. And by the way, we've measured, and it takes 2 days to go from here to here. Right? We can actually get that information. It relies heavily on automation. That's almost all of what I do now is just automate to make our people faster. It has the ability to grow organically over time. As we keep finding more bottlenecks or more things we need to automate, we just keep doing those things. And we're trying to, as best as possible, gracefully interconnect with the development process, primarily by doing things like pushing things into backlogs as opposed to producing big PDFs that nobody wants to read anyway. So Edward Deming is a kind of a big figure in the DevOps world. Actually did some manufacturing improvement way back in Japan after World War II, but he's huge in the DevOps world. He said, spending time optimizing anything but the critical resource is an illusion, right? If you're fixing something upstream of your bottleneck, you're just making a bigger bottleneck. And if you fix something downstream of your bottleneck, you're just having that part of the system run even drier. Because even though it can go faster, it can't be fed quick enough. So what's the bottleneck in AppSec? Quite honestly, the bottleneck in AppSec is people. We just flat don't have enough people. I've never worked for a place where the ratio of AppSec people to devs is even reasonable, let alone where it should be. So how can you optimize that? Well, let's automate all the things that don't take a human mind, all that kind of stupid drudgery that you don't need. And if you can do that, what will you do? Well, you'll drive up consistency, right? At Pearson, when we set up an application to have static code analysis, it's all the same. It's a fully automated process for us now. So I know when I do it the first time or the 100th time, the setup is exactly the same. And it allows us to track work status really accurately. I've been doing this a long time. I can kind of look at a thing and go, yeah, that'll take about a week. That's about 4 days. That's 7 days. No, that's 2 weeks. That's really complicated. But, I mean, I know that because I've been in the field. This isn't really scientific. It's just, quite honestly, straight on my backside. Now we have numbers that we can attach because we can track the status changes as they flow through our pipeline and actually give management real numbers. Like, you want to know how long it's going to take? The last 5 times we did a similar app, it was 5 days. This will probably be 5 days, and I have numbers to back that up. It certainly increased the metrics that we have the ability to show to management. Right now, the monthly metrics gathering that we do every month, also for quarter, for that matter, I do it all at the same time. That takes 6 seconds. 6 seconds to gather the metrics for the quarter. That's really nice because it's all of REST APIs and automation. So I run a thing, 6 seconds later, metrics gathered. And the nice thing is it's hopefully going to reduce friction between us and the dev teams, right? Because there's already, I'm sorry, dev teams don't like security people, generally speaking, and for some good reasons perhaps. Some of us aren't as diplomatic as we should be. And so hopefully this will allow us to sort of bring down that friction and make the interaction a little more pleasant for everybody. So let's talk about the intake of the pipeline. This is sort of the first impression. This is where we have a PM, a product owner, or what have you, go and sort of fill out a web form and say, hey, I need your services, right? And you can think about the services either being an existing app, one that exists already for the company, a brand new app that we're writing from scratch, one that we've tested before, or maybe an app that had some findings that we just need to retest. Those are probably the 4 big sort of use cases. For all of those use cases, we make sure that we only ask them what kind of app, what's the language, who's the audience. We only ask those once. The next time you come to us, if we know about you, we'll simply say, hey, is all this stuff still true? Right? I don't need to ask you. You don't need to fill out a 57-page something every time you talk to us or answer these 82 questions. Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it sharp. And then don't ask it twice. And then as we've sort of started collecting this metadata, we've adapted and changed what we've done to even get a little more granularity. But it's nice because we don't ask them multiple times. So the middle of the pipeline, this is sort of the heart and soul of it. We take inbound requests and we triage them. And because we've broken this up into a pipeline, we're able to do sort of a la carte AppSec, right? I can look at an app and say, you're a very risky app. You're getting the full suite of tools that we have. We're particularly scared about you. You've got really risky environment. You've got a public-facing internet, et cetera, whatever our risk categories are, you get it all. You're not a very important app. In fact, you're used by 20 people internally. You're going to get whatever we can automate and nothing more. And it's allowed us to sort of mix and match and combine our AppSec testing. The cool thing, too, is we can run all these things in parallel. And we've sort of focused on automating the setup, right? If there's a tool that we can't fully automate, we can at least maybe give you a predefined profile and configuration so that you as an analyst just have to go in and kind of push the go button and babysit the thing. All of the stuff that's easy to automate consistently across any kind of random app we've done, at least as best as we can. And the big thing is it allows our people to spend time on things like the configuration profile of an app scanner is very important, right? If you're running AppScan, let's say, and I'm testing a Tomcat-based app, I don't need to run any IIS checks against that. Well, let's create a profile that actually makes sense. We'll let the human do that sort of intelligence part of it, but otherwise give them all the setup material. And then the end of the pipeline, this is where our source of truth for everything that happens in our AppSec program. So in other words, if it's not in ThreadFix, it doesn't exist, right? This is where we combine and store all of the activity, the results of the activities. We're allowed to do dedupe and normalize the data. We can pull metrics out of that guy. And we use ThreadFix actually to push things into Jira and other bug trackers. I wrote a Go client called TF Client that talks to the ThreadFix REST API. And from that, I've written TF metrics, and I'm writing right now a report generator for those people that still, God help me, want reports. And so all of this stuff is now automated and ridiculously consistent, right? And it has allowed us to provide a sort of a consistent output interface to all of our clients. So why do I like AppSec pipelines? It provides really, really good visibility into work in progress. We can log into, that bag of holding thing we call Bo. I can log into Bo and tell. We've got 3 active manual tests going on. These people are getting static analyzed. I have this thing that's coming due that we promised next week and nobody's on it. I need to assign it. All of those things are just kind of handled. And it's really allowed us to have a much better idea of where the bottlenecks are. I mean, I kind of sort of knew this just because of my time in the field, but I have nice hard numbers behind those. And probably the best benefit we've seen is that when I have a manager come up and say, oh my gosh, this is the really highly important thing, we need to drop everything and work on it, I can go into Bo and say, cool, you want me to do that? These things won't be done when I pull everybody off to do your thing. Are you cool with that, right? I didn't really know that before, and I can have those conversations instantly. And it has been flexible enough for us for a range of skill levels. We have some people that are pretty senior, some people that aren't. And by dividing those tasks correctly, it's made our throughput significantly faster. For example, probably one of the coolest things we've done is we have Pearson uses HipChat, and we have a bot in the HipChat channel And we can say to the bot, new app, and give it a stash URL, which is the source code repository. It will add that app to Bow, our inventory system. It will add that app to Threadfix. It will add that app to Checkmarks. Checkmarks will connect to their source code repository and start doing regular source code static analysis scans. And then I wrote some code that takes the output of Checkmarks and automatically pushes that to Threadfix. So one text command takes, I don't know, a minute to do, and I've set up automated repeating static analysis against that app. So it's crazy fast, the type of speed gain we've had. I'd like to talk more about pipelines. There's an entire talk that happened last week at AppSec EU that my coworker did. I'm going to keep moving on, but the video and the slides for this will be posted on the AppSec EU 2015 site. But I love this. I think this pipeline thing is huge. So let's go back to talking about DevOps in a little more detail. So one of these steps of workflow was to make each step repeatable. Right? It replaces that sort of ad hoc way that you tend to do things, particularly like sysadmins in the bad old days, would just SSH to a server, make some changes, log out, and done. What I personally like to do is do it the first time manually and sort of write down the steps. The second time, I have a sort of run book, if nothing else, and I verify that step, and if those steps work, I automate it, and then I never do it again manually. Scripting is a huge friend of yours. If you aren't doing this, I would highly recommend looking at, I don't care which, Chef, Puppet, Salt, Ansible. Pick one of those configuration management tools so that every time you deploy a server, you press a button and it's the same. You harden once at that configuration management level, and all your boxes are hardened. Deploy should be done as some sort of package. Debian package, RPM package, if you're a Windows shop, MSI, I don't really care. But a deploy should be an automated thing that's just a normal part of the software process. It shouldn't be automated. Even our silly little Bow app that we wrote, I create a Debian package for it, and when we have a new version, I package that up, apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, done. And by the way, if I have to reverse and revert, apt-get upgrade or apt-get install the older version, done. And make sure whatever you're doing, right, you can do it for one server or 100,000. If it's not that kind of automated, you're not going to scale. Make each step repeatable for AppSec, right? If you think about that, if you run a test and you find a vulnerability, presumably you're going to fix it, and at some point you will be retesting it. So if you haven't done your work repeatable and it takes you a large amount of setup time to actually do that test, you've just 2x'd the time to get that thing fixed, right? You've doubled it. That's no good. Many times at Rackspace, when we would find issues with particular APIs or applications, we'd write just a little 20 lines of Ruby, Python, I don't care which, pick your favorite language, that would exercise that vulnerability. You win big here, right? One, I can hand that off to the developers and say, hey, devs, run this guy until it says happy. And when it says happy, it's fixed. Then come get me and we'll retest, right? And maybe you can't get 100% of the cases, but you can get 80, 90% of them done. And at least when that dev is coming back to you, you're fairly well assured that the problem is actually fixed. And then when you do retest, guess what? That script is your retester if you can get it accurate enough. That's a fantastic way to get things much quicker. The other thing is, at least at Rackspace in particular, and actually still at Pearson, we end up shifting people often on engagements, right? What's hot for the business day one may not be yet hot for day two. How do you make that work? Well, if you make your test repeatable and understandable, you can actually take people off and on engagements, on activities, without losing that speed. That's a huge part of it. It does take a little extra work maybe, but it is really not that much extra work. And then the other things is like, think about the Unix pipe, right? The whole idea of a Unix pipe is you have a little tool that knows how to do something well, and it knows how to hand off gracefully to the next step in the chain. If you write your little security tests like that, a bunch of a la carte tests, you can string them together, you can run them in parallel, and get a lot more done in a short period of time. The next stage of what we're doing is writing a lot of individual little checks that we can run in an automated fashion and be fairly sure that there's a we need to be sure that there's a very low false positive rate. And if we can get those automated, then when I do a manual assessment, we're just going to cron all those automated things. So if I know use an app, we've got those set up done, and we do those continually. If you have a manual test of that one, now you can pull all those automated results and take those items off your normal manual test checklist, right? I'm just trying to pre-do as much work as possible. So I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. So you do really, really have to get this stuff down and quick, and it'll take a while. It'll take a while to build up this inventory of a la carte tests, but for every one you do, that's one you don't have to do again. Right, my son is great about this. I love how you give him a basketball, he wants to play basketball, and he's mad that he can't make every shot. I'm like, dude, you've had a basketball for 5 minutes. Like, give it a rest. Take a few shots, get some practice. It'll get easier as you go. Never pass on defects. That's a huge part of the workflow idea in DevOps, right? You should test early and often, right? And as you move from design to complete, your tests get more rigorous because there's more to test. You've more fully realized whatever your end goal is. So if the further upstream you can find those issues, the less cost it takes and the less time you've spent getting to the point where you had that failure. So the further sort of right you are, the better your results will be. For AppSec, defects are false positives. Jim is raising his hand. Yeah, ask a question.
How do you resolve the conflict between DevOps trying to automate everything and the need for manual triage to handle all the garbage that comes out of tools? And that's a tough question, and it's not a setup. I run into that roadblock a lot.
So how do you resolve the DevOps wanting to automate everything versus the amount of cruft you get out of tools? So for one thing, we are only going to automate, we've done a little bit of this, we have a lot more work to do. We're only automating the things that don't provide false positives, right? If there's anything close to a 60% false positive rate, or even probably higher than that, I'd say 80, I'm not gonna automate it. But if it's something like secure flag on a cookie, like that's a duh thing. I'll automate that, done. And then those other things just have to be manual, right? I said this actually at AppSec, I think it got tweeted, I thought it was kind of funny, but it's what I've said for a long time. If you can't filter false positives, you're no better than somebody who automates clicking next 5 times on Nessus, right? I mean, like, where's your value add as a human if you can't filter false positives, right? I could teach my 5-year-old son, well, he's not 5 anymore, but when he was 5, I could have taught him to click next 5 times in Nexus and print a PDF. Like, there's no value add to the business if that's all you do, right? So for me, like, one false positive is worth reporting 100 actionable, valuable bugs. And my stance for the people that worked for me at RAC was, if you ever want to find my foot up your backside, you will report a false positive, right? That is just useless, absolutely useless. Devs are super busy. Their timelines are always completely ridiculously short. Handing them a false positive just burns them time for no value to the business, right? And if you're handing them false positives, you've added no value to the business whatsoever, you yourself as a security professional. And I'm trying to concentrate on things that are upstream, like the first thing we automated was a static analysis because that's as early as it can be, right? So local optimizations with a global view. So I can't fix a problem that introduces a problem downstream or upstream of me. And the way that we've sort of worked at Pearson is we first just set out all the pieces of this AppSec pipeline, and we found where the pain points were, and we started automating those. And currently for us, the pain point is reporting, because there's some, I can't fathom why, some groups that want an actual PDF report. And so I'm writing some code to automate that. We pull the status of your app out of ThreadFix, take all the findings, make a nice report out of it, generate it, shoot it to them. I think that's taking me 0.7 seconds right now to generate a draft report, right? That's kind of nice. I wish all of my pen testing had 0.7 seconds. Now that you have this sort of process down, this is where you start to look for those bottlenecks and see where you can optimize and get that flow going better. And this is just iterative. You just have to spend cycles on it. So the next of the 3 ways is improving feedback. So feedback is ridiculously valuable. I've had that open source project since 2008, the OWASP Live CD, now the OWASP WTE project. I have probably had 80 or so emails of feedback. And I know my project is not that awesome. It's been downloaded, the last time I counted was 2009. It had been downloaded 300,000 times. So the ratio was pretty small, like 80 to 300,000. So anytime you get feedback, you really have to capture that feedback and make use of it, because it is not necessary by any means, and it doesn't happen frequently. right? The other thing is to consider is not only the upstream and the downstream of whatever that step is in the process, right? So the upstream of you, you are the customer of that, and downstream of you is your customer. Are you making sure you're providing the next step in that path, everything it needs to succeed and be productive, right? And the other thing is the visibility. If you make these steps and statuses really clear, it makes it really easy to see where things are in the flow, and you can get a great idea of how 10 minutes, thank you, how things are going. I'm going to speed up a bit. Improve feedback. I said most of this, because I want to get to this part. Continual experimentation and learning. A huge part of DevOps. Once you sort of got the process and the feedback going, start experimenting. And this really takes management buy-in to get this done, particularly in a DevOps situation. But it's a huge part. You have to be able to fail. The only thing is you have to fail fast and then learn from it. So here are some examples of experiments I've done in AppSec that have worked very well for me. In most places, I've completely stopped doing reports. I only push stuff into bug trackers or issue trackers or backlogs or however that particular app group handles bugs. My security results are handled the exact same way. The only key difference is I have a security tag or flag or somehow way to distinguish those from the normal bugs, but otherwise it just is another normal bit of the DevOps or the developer's world, right? Bonus if you have an API for your bug tracker, because then you can automate the submission. I said all that stuff. Thread fix, by the way, is what we're using at Pearson. It's a Apache licensed open core type product. This is another really key one. Each severity of vulnerability we attach an SLA to, and I'm not sold with the idea of SLA in terms of a term, but that's what we call it. But the key thing is it's the SLA for a remediation plan, not to have it fixed. Because quite honestly, you have no idea how long some of these fixes will take. Some of them are simple, 2 lines of code, a check-in, a commit, we're done. Some of them are re-architecting the entire application. So now that you have a remediation plan in place, you're sitting down at the table with the product groups and having a conversation about how can we get this fixed in a way that works for both of us. But once I get that date, now I have something I can hold the product teams to, and I can now do things like a week out from that promise date, gently remind the product team, hey, you said you were going to have this issue fixed by this date, is that true? No, it isn't, okay, and if they pass that date, I start walking up the org chart. Right now, the head of product is finding out that this other group is 3 weeks past their SLA for fixing an issue. If you can get that management buy-in, you can really get stuff fixed. And I tended to remind people, by the way, next email in a week goes to your boss. So do you want to fix it? Do you want to talk to me? I can play carrot, I can play stick. Like, which one do you want? I'd prefer carrot, but I'll whack you if I have to. So I talked about this already. Automating infrastructure with Chef, Puppet, Salt, whatever. It's a fantastic thing. Right, because you create these recipes or cookbooks or stacks or playbooks or whatever the technology you're using calls them. This makes every deploy the same, right? So for a security person, this is the place where you want to spend time, because now I know if that webhead goes out the door and I've actually improved and hardened that recipe, every API goes out the door, improved and hardened. And now I don't really care as a security person if you launch 1 or 500 of them, because I know they're all hardened, right? Not only that, but all of these technologies have a way to tag different functionalities, and you can assign requirements in terms of security against those tags, and then do your testing based on tags. So now you can actually confine your testing to database things, to only those things that get MySQL. You can confine your web server hardening standard only those things that say are Apache or Nginx. And you can actually focus your time on only testing the things that are tied to those tags. Really, really improves your throughput. It makes it efficient because you're not testing for databases when there isn't any. The other thing we did at RAC that was very useful is we had a what I called an inspector. So this is like the idea of building a house, right? You have an architect who designs a house. You have a builder who builds according to the plans of that architect, and then you usually have an inspector who comes in and makes sure everything's okay according to whatever the standard is, right? Build yourself an inspector, tie it to a post-deploy hook, and then validate that that deploy matches your needs, right? So I worked for a while with the Rackspace container product, and I use this thing called Linus. It's an open source whole bunch of SSH code that does a bunch of hardening checks. And every time that we did a deploy, or a check-in rather, of the container product, I would create a container, I would drop Linus in it, I would run it, it would make sure it had all of the baseline security controls we needed in the Linux kernel via the syscontrol method. And if it didn't fail, it returned a 1. That Jenkins jobs turned red. And we actually found some regressions with this. This is one time where the dev team actually really liked security work because the guy came to me and said, man, this is cool, your thing turned red. And I realized I forgot to change this change in Ansible, and hey, I added it in and now we're fixed. Instead of waiting until that product was done and out the door, that was found the next day after a check-in. I mean, fantastic. It completely turned around the normal sort of cycle of working with dev teams. And then an agent, one mole to rule them all. Ideally, this is some sort of agent that you can use as part of your standard deploy, drop it on the system, make it read-only, and make it just tell you what's going on with that server. By the way, I read SSHD config, and root login is allowed. That's a fail, we don't allow that. Report it back to me. Don't make any changes, because the sysadmins will not install this if you make changes, but now, 5 minutes, thank you. Now you can actually go to those people and say, hey, why is SSH root login in? Let's change your Ansible, Salt, whatever configuration management script and get this fixed. So Cloud Passage is a commercial vendor, Mozilla MIG is an open source thing, or you write your own. And then lastly, let's turn vulnerability scanning on its head, right? So for each of your key constituents of your product or your app, subscribe to those vulnerability emails and then parse them for important keywords, right? So that you know that now you're a Tomcat shop and you have a Tomcat app, and Tomcat just released a vulnerability in whatever version you're running. You'll get that email and you can go walk to the team and say, hey, there's a problem with Tomcat. How are we going to fix that, right? Now we're not waiting till the quarterly scan and saying, oh God, it's been 3 months that it's been vulnerable. What are we going to do? And you can now have a nice, calm conversation with your ops team about how to get it fixed instead of this panic like, oh my God, it's been out there for months. What do we do? Let's all scream and ruin your weekend. You can do this for free. I did this at a couple places with, quite honestly, a Gmail account and some filters, and that works surprisingly well for me. There's also a commercial product, Secunia Vim, that'll do this for you. You just have to pay. But I really love the idea of me being able to approach a team and say, hey, there's a problem with this. It just came out today. Let's figure out how we're going to fix this. We can take a week or two. We don't have to be panicked about it, right? We don't have to lose a weekend or go crazy, depending on how severe it is. But at least now it's a complete different view on how you interact with ops teams in particular. So key takeaways, automate, automate, automate. Like find paper cuts and automate them. Something I did as a pen tester that you think wouldn't be all that awesome is we created a zip file of the directory structure for the output of all of the tools we used. And everybody, when they had an engagement, they unzipped it, they named it the name of the client, and they dropped their stuff in the same subdirectory. Now, if I leave, I know where your Nmap files are because they're in the Nmap directory, and your Nessus are in the Nessus directory. It's a stupid thing, but it saved tons of time, right? A zip file. Made our lives much better. And find your workflow, whatever it is, standardize it and optimize it, right? Because you're not going to get any better if you're one-off everything. That was a huge thing for us at Pearson. And we've been able to do, what are we averaging? 35 assessments a month, I believe, if I remember correctly, because of this automation, because we're able to get these things done so much faster. Crucially, make these systems that can grow organically over time. You're never going to get the 3 months to make the perfect a la wonderful system. That's great. Make the little pieces as you go, and just make sure they're easy to add together. If you do that design from the onset, you're golden. Simple things like we used in a pen testing group that I was at, we actually used the first time we reported a finding block. That became a template for the next time that finding was found. Why? Because the boilerplate for cross-site scripting is the same for every cross-site scripting bug. I don't need to rewrite that. I shouldn't be copying and pasting it. Let's automate it. And then if you don't already know how to do it, learn to talk dev. Because if you can go to the guys and say, hey, I looked at your Jenkins thing and the job isn't working, and I did a pull, I cloned your Git repository, and I have a PR now for your Ansible script that'll fix that and actually add some hardening to Apache. They like you. They respect you. They understand you. You're talking their language, right? But if you say, oh, I noticed the directory indexing is on Apache because I ran Nessus, that's a totally different conversation. So learn to talk dev. You'll get much farther with the developers and sysadmins you're talking to. Books to read, I love the Phoenix Project. It is an absolutely fantastic book. It's actually a fiction book, so it's a story about a fictional company and the problems they have and how DevOps help them. And then this Cloud System Administration book is just a very good book from a very well-versed system administrator about how to do things at scale. And then questions. I did pretty good on time. Phew. Any questions before I hand out free OWASP stuff? It's really weird staring into a light. I don't know if I like that. What is this thing? Oh, nice. Questions? Can't see? Going once, going twice?
Nope.
Yes.
What would you recommend as a first step if somebody wants to implement these practices in the DevOps?
The biggest thing for me was just laying down the process. And literally, I got a piece of paper, because at the office I was at, they didn't have whiteboards. I would much prefer a whiteboard, but whatever. I got a piece of paper, and I just said, what do we need to do to apps? We need to do static analysis. We need to do dynamic analysis. Some of that's manual. Some of that's automatic. What tools have we already licensed? And I just listed them out, and I said, okay, what does it look like if I come to our group and want to do AppSec work? What do I need? Okay, for static analysis, well, I need to know your source code repo, and I need to have a name. And I just sort of planned out what the process looked like on paper. I'm not talking about some beautiful diagram. You should see, I mean, look at the graphics on my slides. They're not pretty. It doesn't have to be all that intricate, but it just laid it out, and now the whole team had something to talk about, right? I turned that into a nice Visio-like diagram, and we talked about it because we're all geographically dispersed. There's nobody who lives in Texas with me. So yeah, that's the first step, is just think about your process and what steps you can do and what activities are involved in your AppSec team, and lay out what it looks like from customer comes and you give them something. Figure that out, and then figure out where the manual things are that don't take a human brain that you can automate. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Maybe any questions yet? One more, okay. So one more quick.
It's weird having a dark audience.
Hi, over here to the left.
Yes.
Anyway, do you do any visualizations of the process for management and stuff, like colorful graphs, and do you think it helps?
Yes and no, and sort of. So yes, I think it helps. I don't know why, because I don't understand it, but it does really, really help. So currently, the metrics that I do, I gather and put into a CSV that we have somebody make into a pretty charts. We are working on a dashboard right now using Dash.io that will actually read out of ThreadFix and produce a dashboard that's live. And now the monthly report will be take a screenshot of the Dash.io dashboard and drop it in PowerPoint, and done. So yes, I think that's a huge thing. It'll be interesting because we've had several iterations with management. They thought they wanted A, and we gave them A, and they said, oh, that's neat, but what about B? And we're like, okay, fine, well, let's do B. So understand that you'll probably never get that nailed down perfectly, but if it's all API calls and you have a client, it's not so bad to make changes. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Oh, just a second, please.
I have really.
And I'll be out in the hall too if you need to ask me further questions. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this because I think it's important. Yes.
My name is Paweł in Polish. I have short question. What's your favorite programming language?
What's my favorite programming language? Well, all of the stuff I've written in lately has been Go. It's all Golang. I love Golang. I'm a Go fanboy. I've written a ton of Python as well, and back in the bad old days, I used to write Java apps. Before JSPs existed, which is how long ago that was. Yeah, it was awful. And I've written a whole ton of PHP, and I'm sorry, world, but I did, and it was awful. I don't do it anymore. I've learned. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, the last one, okay?
Okay, so yeah. Yep. From the DevOps perspective, I'm not the security guy. I'm here. Yep. I'm not a security guy. I'm a DevOps. Could you recommend some resources for the DevOps guys that have written cases that implements that kind of approach in the pipeline?
Are you looking for DevOps in general or DevOps plus security?
Plus security. I mean, this whole presentation. Do you have some extra resource? I mean, blog posts, some mailing list where people provide some broader information about how to implement this security into the DevOps.
Okay, 3 things. 1, Google Gene Kim, Gene Kim, and come ask me afterwards. I can spell it for you. He's fantastic, just in general about DevOps, everything. 2, there's sort of 2 names floating around. I prefer rugged DevOps, quite honestly, but there's also Sec DevOps and DevOps Sec. So those are 3 things you should Google for to find blog posts. And 3rd, I will be starting an OWASP AppSec pipeline project where I'm going to gather all this stuff together. So hopefully, I'll be back in Texas by Friday, and I will start that project and start like collecting all these resources, because there's a ton of them out there, but they're kind of scattered. There's not like a good place yet. And so I'm hoping to get that OWASP project to be the place to sort of talk how you can handle security in this like madly, fastly changing world, if that helps.
Okay.
Ugh.
Thank you again.
Yep, absolutely.